Clara Zimmerman had never considered herself a particularly grumpy person until the third person that week told her she needed to smile more, and she told them exactly where they could shove their unsolicited advice. She sat in the corner of the bustling café, her laptop open, a cold expression on her face as she reviewed architectural blueprints for the renovation project that was slowly draining her sanity. At 26, she had built a reputation as one of the most talented restoration architects in the city, but that reputation came with a price. Long hours, demanding clients, and a perpetual scowl that seemed to have taken permanent residence on her face. The café door chimed, and Clara didn't look up. She had learned long ago that the world continued spinning whether she acknowledged it or not. What she didn't expect was for someone to slide into the seat across from her, uninvited and utterly presumptuous. This seat taken. The voice was warm, masculine, and far too cheerful for a Monday morning. Clara's eyes snapped up, ready to deliver a cutting remark, but the words died in her throat. The man sitting across from her was perhaps the most striking person she had ever seen. Not in a model-perfect way, but in a way that suggested he actually lived life instead of just posing for it. Dark hair slightly tousled, strong jawline, and eyes that crinkled at the corners like he smiled often. He wore an expensive-looking charcoal suit, but the tie was loosened, the top button undone. "Yes," Clara said flatly, "by me and my work." The man's smile didn't falter. "I'm Adrian Nelson, and I promise I'm not here to bother you, well, not intentionally. The café is packed, and this is literally the only available seat." Clara glanced around. He wasn't lying. Every other table was occupied, people crammed together in the morning rush. She sighed, a heavy sound that conveyed her displeasure. "Fine, but I'm working, so don't try to make conversation." "Wouldn't dream of it," Adrian said, pulling out his phone. But Clara noticed he kept glancing at her laptop screen, and after the fifth time she slammed it partially closed. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice sharp. Adrian had the decency to look sheepish. "Sorry. I couldn't help but notice those blueprints. Are you an architect, restoration architect, and you're definitely making conversation after I explicitly told you not to? You're right, I apologize." He held up his hands in surrender, but that smile remained. It was infuriating how genuine it seemed. "It's just that I own a commercial real estate company and I'm always fascinated by restoration work. The way people can take something old and broken and make it beautiful again." Despite herself, Clara felt a flicker of interest. "Nelson, Adrian Nelson." "Wait, Nelson Property Group," his smile widened. "Guilty." Clara had heard of Nelson Property Group. Everyone in the architecture and real estate world had. They owned half the commercial buildings in the city and were worth hundreds of millions, possibly billions. Adrian Nelson was the CEO, and from what she had read, he had taken over the company from his father 5 years ago and turned it into an empire. He was 32, according to the articles, unmarried, and apparently had a reputation for being genuinely nice, which in the cutthroat world of real estate was either refreshing or suspicious. "So you're slumming it at a regular café because?" Clara asked. "Because their coffee is fantastic and I don't believe in pretension," Adrian replied easily. "Plus, I like being around people. Reminds me why I do what I do." Clara wanted to roll her eyes, but something in his tone suggested he actually meant it. "Well, Mr. Nelson, as fascinating as this has been, I really do need to work." "Of course." He settled back in his chair, pulling out his own laptop. For the next 20 minutes they worked in silence, and Clara found herself oddly comfortable with his presence. He didn't fidget, didn't try to make small talk, just focused on his own work with the same intensity she brought to hers. When she finally packed up her things, Adrian looked up. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "Why?" Clara asked suspiciously. "Because if you are, I'd like to buy you a coffee." "As an apology for invading your space." "You don't need to do that, I know, but I'd like to." Clara studied him for a long moment. There was something about Adrian Nelson that unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. Maybe it was the way he seemed so genuinely interested in everything, like the world was full of wonder instead of disappointment. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with the usual wariness people had when faced with her perpetual scowl, but with something that looked almost like curiosity. Maybe, she finally said, which was more than she had intended to give. His smile could have lit up the entire city. I'll take maybe. Clara left the café feeling strangely off balance, like the world had tilted slightly on its axis and she hadn't quite found her footing again. She showed up the next morning telling herself it was because the café had good coffee and a reliable internet connection, not because a certain cheerful CEO might be there. But when she walked in and saw Adrian already seated at the same corner table, 2 coffee cups in front of him, her traitorous heart did a little skip. I took a guess, Adrian said as she approached. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream, am I right? How did you know? Clara asked, sliding into the seat. You strike me as someone who doesn't believe in unnecessary additions. He wasn't wrong. Clara took a sip and found it was exactly how she liked it, perfect temperature, strong enough to wake the dead. Thank you, you're welcome. And before you tell me to shut up and let you work, I promise this is the extent of my interruption for the day. But it wasn't. An hour later, when Clara let out a frustrated groan at her computer screen, Adrian looked up with concern. Everything okay? The contractor for my current project is being an idiot, Clara muttered. He wants to use modern materials instead of period-appropriate ones because they're cheaper. He doesn't understand that the entire point of restoration is authenticity. Can you override him? Technically, yes. But it means going over his head to the building owner, and that always causes drama. Adrian was quiet for a moment. What's the building? The old Garrison Theater on 8th Avenue, built in 1928. It's been abandoned for 20 years, and the new owner wants to turn it into a performance space again. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. That's my building. Clara's head snapped up. What? I bought the Garrison 6 months ago. I've been looking for the right team to restore it. He leaned forward, his entire demeanor changing from casual to intensely focused. Tell me what you need. For the next hour, Clara forgot about being guarded. She talked about the theater's original Art Deco details, the hand-painted murals that needed careful restoration, the way the acoustics had been designed specifically for live performance. Adrian listened like every word she said was the most important thing he had ever heard, asking intelligent questions, taking notes on his phone. Fire your contractor, Adrian finally said. I'll bring in someone who understands the vision, and I want you to have complete creative control. Budget isn't an issue. I want that theater restored the way it deserves to be. Clara stared at him. You don't even know my work. Then show me. She pulled up her portfolio, watching his face as he scrolled through her previous projects, the library she had saved from demolition, the hotel that had been restored to its 19th century glory, the row of brownstones she had painstakingly brought back to life. With each image, Adrian's expression grew more animated. This is incredible, he said softly. You don't just restore buildings, you restore history. You restore beauty. Something in Clara's chest tightened. No one had ever understood her work that way before. Most people saw old buildings and saw dollar signs or inconvenience. Adrian looked at her portfolio like she had shown him art. I love what I do, she heard herself say. Even when it's frustrating. I can tell. It shows in every detail. They talked until the café started preparing for lunch service, and when Clara finally stood to leave, she felt lighter than she had in months. Adrian walked out with her and they stood on the sidewalk in the weak winter sunlight. Can we do this again tomorrow? Adrian asked. And maybe the day after that. I like talking with you, Clara Zimmerman. She should have said no, should have maintained her walls, kept him at a distance. But instead she found herself nodding. I'd like that. Over the next 2 weeks the corner table became their table. Adrian always arrived first, always had her coffee waiting. They talked about everything, architecture and business, the city's history, their frustrations and dreams. Clara learned that Adrian had lost his mother when he was 15, that he had rebuilt his relationship with his father from scratch, that he believed in using his wealth to preserve the things that mattered. Adrian learned that Clara's grumpiness was a shield, that she had been burned by people who didn't take her work seriously, that beneath the sharp edges was someone who felt everything deeply. The Garrison Theater project became their shared passion. Adrian cleared out the obstacles, and Clara dove into the restoration with everything she had. She found herself texting him photos of discoveries. Original light fixtures hidden in storage, intact sections of the decorative plasterwork, the beautiful bones of the building emerging from decades of neglect. His responses were always immediate, always enthusiastic. The man seemed to run on pure optimism, and Clara discovered that, instead of finding it annoying, she was starting to find it addictive. One morning, 3 weeks after they met, Adrian didn't show up at the café. Clara told herself she wasn't disappointed as she sat alone at their table with her laptop. Told herself she definitely wasn't checking her phone every 5 minutes. When it finally buzzed with a text, she grabbed it almost desperately. Emergency at the office. I'm so sorry. Can I make it up to you with dinner? Clara stared at the message for a long time. Dinner was different from coffee. Dinner was intentional, intimate. Dinner was a date. Her finger hovered over the keyboard, and she could feel her walls trying to slam back into place. But she thought about Adrian's smile, the way he listened, how he made her feel seen in a way she never had before. Where and when? She typed back. His response was immediate. Tonight, 7, I'll pick you up, and Clara, I'm really glad you said yes. She spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready that evening, trying on half her wardrobe before settling on a deep green dress that brought out her eyes. She even left her hair down instead of in its usual severe bun. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy. Adrian arrived exactly on time, and the way his face lit up when she opened the door made her stomach flip. He wore a dark blue suit that fit him perfectly, and he held a single white rose. You look beautiful, he said softly. You clean up okay yourself, Clara replied, but her voice was gentler than usual. He took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Not flashy or expensive looking, but the kind of place that had been family-owned for generations. The owner greeted Adrian by name, kissing both his cheeks. Your usual table, Adrian? The elderly woman asked. Please, Maria, and this is Clara. She's very special. Maria looked at Clara with sharp, assessing eyes, then smiled. Welcome, dear. Any woman who makes this one smile even bigger than usual must be extraordinary. They were seated in a private corner, candles flickering on the table. Over pasta and wine, their conversation flowed even easier than at the café. Adrian told her about his day, the crisis he had handled, the difficult decisions he had to make. Clara talked about the progress on the theater, the small victories and challenges. Can I ask you something? Adrian said as they shared tiramisu. Why do you always act like you're expecting people to disappoint you? Clara's instinct was to deflect, but she found herself answering honestly. Because they usually do. I learned early that people say one thing and mean another. That promises are just words. Being grumpy, as everyone calls it, is easier than being hurt. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, solid, real. I'm not going to disappoint you, Clara. I know you have no reason to believe that yet, but I'm going to prove it to you. Why? She whispered. Why me? You could have anyone. Because you're brilliant and passionate and real, because you challenge me. Because when you let your guard down, even for a moment, it's like watching the sun break through clouds. And because from the moment I sat down at that table 3 weeks ago, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Clara's breath caught. Adrian, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the kind of person who falls in love and believes in happy endings. Then let me show you, he said simply. One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations, just us figuring it out together. She looked at their joined hands, at his open, honest face, Everything in her screamed to run to protect herself. But a smaller, quieter voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was worth the risk. "Okay," she said. "One day at a time." Adrian's smile was radiant. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "That's all I'm asking for." The next 3 months passed in a blur of discovery. They fell into a rhythm: coffee every morning, late-night phone calls when Clara was working on site, dinners whenever their schedules aligned. Adrian brought her to construction meetings and deferred to her expertise without hesitation. Clara found herself softening, her perpetual scowl appearing less frequently. People at work actually commented on the change, which she found both embarrassing and secretly pleasing. Adrian introduced her to his father, Richard Nelson, a gruff man in his 60s who reminded Clara a bit of herself. He had looked her over critically when they met for lunch, then turned to Adrian and said, "She's got backbone, I like her." Clara met Adrian's friends and business associates and slowly began to understand the full scope of his world. Nelson Property Group wasn't just a real estate company. It was a carefully built empire focused on sustainable development and historic preservation. Adrian had turned his father's profit-driven business into something meaningful, and he had done it while remaining genuinely kind. But it was the small moments Clara treasured most. The way Adrian brought her favorite pastry when she was stressed. How he listened to her rant about incompetent contractors without trying to fix everything, just letting her be heard. The night he showed up at the theater at 2 in the morning because she had texted him a photo of a major discovery, and he wanted to see it in person. They had stood in the empty building, surrounded by scaffolding and tarps, and he had pulled her close and kissed her for the first time. It had been everything she had never let herself hope for: gentle but passionate, sweet but intense. When they finally broke apart, she had whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you." "Good," Adrian had replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because I fell in love with you the moment you told me to stop making conversation." They had laughed, the sound echoing through the empty theater, and Clara had felt something inside her that she had long thought broken finally begin to heal. Spring brought the theater restoration into its final phase. The opening night was scheduled for late May, a grand gala event that would benefit the city's arts programs. Clara threw herself into every detail, determined to make it perfect. Adrian supported her completely, even when she got snappish from stress and lack of sleep. He would show up with food, make her take breaks, remind her that she was brilliant and talented and that the theater would be magnificent. 2 weeks before opening night, Clara was doing a final walkthrough when she heard voices echoing from the lobby. She emerged from backstage to find Adrian standing in the center of the restored space, his father beside him, both men staring up at the intricately painted ceiling. "My God," Richard said quietly, "I had forgotten how beautiful this place was. You've been here before?" Clara asked, approaching them. Richard turned to her, and there was emotion in his weathered face. "My father brought me here when I was a boy. We saw a performance together, just the two of us. It was one of the last times before he died. I had forgotten about it until now." Adrian's hand found Clara's, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, understanding the significance of this moment. Richard Nelson was not a sentimental man, but here in this restored theater, he was connecting with his past in a way he clearly hadn't expected. "You've done something extraordinary here," Richard said to Clara. "You haven't just restored a building. You've brought back memories, history, life." "Thank you." After Richard left, Clara and Adrian stood alone in the theater. The late afternoon sun streamed through the restored windows, painting everything in gold. "I never told you the real reason I bought this building," Adrian said quietly. Clara looked at him, waiting. "My mother brought me here once when I was 7. We snuck out without telling my father, just the two of us. We saw a children's theater production. She died 3 years later, and I had almost forgotten that afternoon. But when I walked past this building last year and saw it was for sale, abandoned and crumbling, I remembered. I bought it thinking I would restore it in her memory. And then I met you, and you gave me something so much more than I imagined possible." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "What did I give you? A future that honors the past. A partner who understands why beauty and history matter. You." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Clara Zimmerman, I love you. I love your grumpy exterior and your passionate heart. I love how you fight for what matters and how you're slowly letting me past your walls. I love every single thing about you." "I love you too," Clara said, the words coming easily now. "Even though you're ridiculously optimistic and cheerful and everything I thought I didn't want. You make me believe in happy endings, Adrian Nelson, and that's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, in the theater they had brought back to life together. Opening night arrived with a flurry of activity. Clara had never been comfortable being the center of attention, but Adrian insisted she be recognized for her work. When she walked into the theater that evening, transformed by lighting and filled with elegantly dressed guests, she felt a swell of pride. This was her work, her vision. Her heart poured into every detail. Adrian found her backstage, looking devastating in a tuxedo. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" "For everyone to see what you've accomplished, for the world to know how incredible you are." "I preferred being grumpy and anonymous," Clara muttered, but she was smiling. The evening was a triumph. Guest after guest praised the restoration, the attention to detail, the way the theater felt both historic and alive. Clara gave a brief speech, her hand shaking slightly until she found Adrian in the crowd, his face full of pride and love. That steadied her. Later, after the official program ended and the guests mingled with champagne and music, Adrian pulled Clara out onto the stage. The curtain was down, hiding them from the crowd. "I have something to ask you," he said, and Clara's heart started pounding because she recognized the look on his face. "Adrian, let me say this first," he interrupted gently. "6 months ago, I sat down at a café table across from the most beautiful, fierce, talented woman I had ever seen. She told me not to talk to her, and I fell in love with her anyway. These past months with you have been the best of my life. You've made me better, happier, more complete. I don't want to imagine a future without you in it." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Clara Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you let this grumpy woman and her sunshine man figure out forever together?" Tears streamed down Clara's face. Every instinct she had once had to protect herself, to push people away, had been slowly dismantled by this wonderful, genuine, impossibly optimistic man. He had proven his love through actions, not just words. He had supported her dreams, challenged her walls, and loved her exactly as she was. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, yes." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, a beautiful vintage piece that looked like it belonged in the era of the theater around them. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her as applause erupted from the other side of the curtain. Apparently, they hadn't been as hidden as they thought. When the curtain rose, revealing them to the crowd, Clara didn't feel exposed or uncomfortable. She felt celebrated. Adrian kept his arm around her waist, and together they accepted the congratulations and joy of everyone around them. Richard Nelson pulled Clara aside later in the evening, his gruff exterior softened by champagne and emotion. "You've made my son happier than I've ever seen him. And you've given this family something to be proud of beyond just money and buildings. Welcome to the family, Clara." The wedding took place 8 months later in the Garrison Theater, surrounded by the beauty they had created together. Clara wore a vintage-inspired gown that made Adrian tear up when he saw her walking down the aisle. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. Adrian promised to always bring her coffee and to never stop trying to make her smile. Clara promised to let him in, to trust him, and to remind him that sometimes it was okay to be grumpy. Their first dance was to music played by a live orchestra in the theater's perfect acoustics, and Clara thought about how far she had come. From the woman who sat alone in cafes, pushing everyone away, to this moment, surrounded by love and possibility. 2 years later, Clara sat in their newly purchased brownstone, working on blueprints for her latest restoration project. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter they planned to name Rose. Adrian was due home any minute from the office, and she found herself smiling at the thought, something that had become second nature. The front door opened, and she heard his familiar footsteps. "I'm home," Adrian called out. "In the study," Clara replied. He appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, carrying takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. "How are my two favorite girls?" he asked, setting down the food and pressing a kiss to her forehead, then kneeling to kiss her belly. "Your daughter has been using my bladder as a trampoline all day, and I'm working on a project that's going to drive me crazy, but I'm good," Clara said. Adrian laughed. "Want to talk about it over dinner?" "Always." As they sat at the kitchen table, discussing her project and his day, Clara reflected on the strange, wonderful path her life had taken. She had been so determined to be independent, so certain that her grumpiness would protect her from hurt. But Adrian had seen through all of that to the person underneath, and he had loved her anyway. More than that, he had helped her learn to love herself, walls and all. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked, noticing her faraway expression. "About how you ruined my carefully cultivated grumpy reputation," Clara said dryly. "I have no regrets," he replied, grinning. "You're much more fun when you're happy, though I have to admit I still find it incredibly attractive when you tell incompetent contractors exactly what you think of them." "Good, because that's never going away. I wouldn't want it to." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I love you, Clara Nelson, grumpy, happy, everything in between." "I love you too," she said softly, "even though you're still ridiculously optimistic about everything." "Someone has to be," Adrian said. "It balances us out." He was right. They balanced each other perfectly. His sunshine to her clouds, his optimism to her realism, his immediate warmth to her slow-to-kindle fire. Together, they had built something neither of them could have created alone. A partnership based on respect, love, and the understanding that opposites don't just attract, they complete. When Rose was born 2 months later, Clara held her daughter in her arms and looked up at Adrian, seeing the same overwhelming love reflected in his eyes. They had created this tiny person together, just as they had restored the Garrison Theater together, just as they were building their life together. "She has your eyes," Adrian whispered, touching their daughter's tiny hand. "And your smile," Clara replied. "God help us all." Adrian laughed softly. "Think she'll be sunshine or grumpy, with us as parents, probably both, but that's okay, we'll love her either way." "Just like I love you," Adrian said, leaning down to kiss her gently. "All of you, every mood, every moment." Clara smiled, genuine and full, the expression that had once been so rare now coming easily. "Forever," she agreed. And as she sat there with her husband and daughter, Clara Zimmerman Nelson realized that happy endings weren't just fairy tales. Sometimes they were grumpy architects meeting optimistic CEOs in crowded cafes. Sometimes they were walls coming down and hearts opening up. Sometimes they were two opposites finding out they fit together perfectly, creating something beautiful and lasting and real. 5 years after that first morning at the café, Clara stood on the stage of the Garrison Theater during its anniversary gala. Adrian stood beside her, and 3-year-old Rose was held by her grandfather Richard in the front row. Clara had been asked to say a few words about the restoration, but as she looked out at the crowd, she found herself wanting to talk about something else entirely. "This theater represents transformation," she began, her voice steady. "When I first saw this building, it was broken and abandoned, left to decay. Many people would have torn it down, started fresh, but my husband saw something else. He saw beauty hidden beneath damage. He saw potential. He believed that with care and dedication and love, something discarded could become magnificent again." She paused, finding Adrian's eyes. "That's what he saw in me too. I was the grumpy woman in the café, pushing everyone away. He was the optimistic CEO who refused to be pushed. Together, we restored this theater and built a life I never imagined possible. That's what love does. It doesn't change who you are, it helps you become the best version of yourself. The applause was thunderous, but Clara only heard Adrian's voice as he pulled her close and whispered, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "Right back at you, sunshine," Clara whispered back. And there, in the theater where they had first kissed, first got engaged, and got married, surrounded by the life and love they had built together, Clara Zimmerman Nelson smiled. Not a small smile, not a reluctant one, but a full, genuine, radiantly happy smile that proved sometimes the grumpiest people just need the right sunshine to help them bloom. Their story had started with a simple question: is this seat taken? And from that small beginning had grown something vast and enduring. A love that honored both their differences and their similarities. A partnership built on respect and passion and the daily choice to show up for each other. A family rooted in authenticity and care. As they left the theater that night, Rose holding both their hands between them, Clara thought about all the moments that had led here. Every coffee shared, every conversation, every wall that had come down brick by brick. Adrian had been patient and persistent, and she had been brave enough to let him in. Together, they had proven that opposites attract not despite their differences, but because of them. His optimism balanced her realism. Her grounded nature anchored his dreams. They made each other better, stronger, more complete. Years continued to pass, filled with the beautiful mundane moments that make a life. Family dinners and work challenges, additional children and career successes, arguments and makeups, laughter and tears. Through it all, Adrian remained Clara's sunshine, and she remained his anchor in reality. They built the kind of love that authors write about and dreamers hope for. Steady, deep, enduring. On their 10th anniversary, Adrian took Clara back to the café where they had met. It had changed ownership, been renovated, transformed into something new, but they sat at a corner table anyway, holding hands across the surface. "You remember what you said when I first sat down?" Adrian asked. "I told you the seat was taken," Clara replied with a smile. "Best lie you ever told," Adrian said. "Because that seat wasn't taken. It was waiting for me, and you were waiting for me too, even if you didn't know it yet." Clara squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you were too optimistic to believe me when I tried to push you away." "I saw through your grumpiness from day one," Adrian said. "I saw the brilliant, passionate, incredible woman underneath, and I wasn't about to let her slip away." "Thank you," Clara said softly, "for seeing me, for loving me, for proving that happy endings are real." "Thank you for letting me," Adrian replied, "for taking the risk, for choosing me every day, for being my forever." They sat in that café, older and wiser, with a decade of love behind them and decades more ahead. The grumpy architect and the sunshine CEO who had proven that opposites don't just attract, they create magic. They create partnerships that last. They create love stories worth telling. And as they walked out into the city street, heading home to their children and their life, Clara Zimmerman Nelson felt grateful for every moment that had led her here. Grateful for the day a stranger sat down at her table uninvited. Grateful for the courage to say yes to dinner, to love, to forever. Grateful that she had been grumpy enough to be interesting and brave enough to change. Most of all, grateful for Adrian Nelson, the man who had taken her walls as a challenge and her heart as a gift, who had loved her through every mood and moment, who had shown her that true love isn't about finding someone who makes you happy all the time, but finding someone you choose to walk through life with, grumpy days and sunshine days alike. Their love story wasn't about opposites changing each other. It was about opposites complementing each other, creating something neither could have built alone. It was about finding home in another person, about choosing partnership over independence, about believing that love, real and true and lasting, was worth every risk. And in the end, the grumpy architect and the optimistic CEO lived happily ever after, proving that sometimes the best love stories start with an occupied seat and a man too sunshine-filled to take no for an answer.